You've all heard of comfort food, the kind of food you like to eat regardless of its nutritional value, but it just makes you feel good. Did you know movies operate the same way? That's right, we're going to talk about the movies that we like regardless of critical praise, box office totals, and overall audience reception. These are the movies we love for being what they are, why they are, and how they are. These are our comfort flicks.
Power is a fragile thing.
Staring me up how much I love you.
Dwight, is that you?
Angel.
When she wishes it, we die.
One of these days she'll pull the trigger.
It's a good game.
But there's a dame to kill for.
For every passionate filmgoer, they always have that one film that they've watched multiple times in the movie theaters. And it's a film that they always hold a very close place in their heart. For myself, the current record holder is recent. It is Avengers Endgame, which I saw 8 times. But for a good long time before that, there was one film that held the record for a very long time, and that was 2005's Sin City. That one I saw a grand total of 7 times. This was a film that I was absolutely rabid to see when I saw the first trailer when me and my parents went to go see The Aviator. I didn't know Frank Miller from Adam at the time. I was not as passionate about reading a lot of the Batman comics as I am now, so I didn't really know anything about Frank Miller at that point. I just knew Rob Rodriguez was making a movie that was way different compared to everything else I had seen of his before. And I definitely knew him because around that point, I was in awe of all the great independent filmmakers, and Robert Rodriguez was just inspiring. This is a man who practically makes everything out of his own closet, figuratively speaking. I mean, in his early days, yeah, out of his closet, but nowadays he has Troublemaker Studios, which is like this big ranch out of Texas where he films a lot of the elaborate stuff out of a green screen studio he has. He edits it, composes it. He is just a marvel when it comes to compact filmmaking on a limited budget. Compared to his prior outings, especially El Mariachi, Desperado, this seemed like a lot bigger. This seemed like him taking a lot of his techniques and somehow using those simple techniques to make a bigger film, and I was just legitimately intrigued. But even then, I still knew nothing about Sin City. So I jumped in and just started reading a load of Sin City graphic novels. My first one was That Yellow Bastard. So by the time the movie was coming out, I was ready for it. And when it came out, I was not disappointed. I loved everything about this movie. It practically owned me for that entire year, so much so that when it finally came out in physical media, I didn't get the DVD that came out. I knew they were coming out with an extended edition, and yes, that is the one to get. So of course I was waiting for the next one to come out. They actually practically announced it after the first film banked, and they pretty much confirmed from the get-go. They said that the one story they're definitely going to do is A Dame to Kill For, which is the story that preceded The Big Fat Kill, which was in the first movie. And then nothing happened. Sin City was more and more becoming something of an afterthought, and it really was a good 9 years before we finally got the follow-up, Sin City, A Dame to Kill For. My love of Sin City was it was still there. I still love it to this very day, and every time I rewatch the first movie, I still remember why I loved it so much. But a lot of other things had popped up in between these movies, and I was worried when this one was coming out that something may have gotten watered down, that I wasn't going to enjoy it as much. I was also worried about this one because A Dame to Kill For was the only major Sin City story that was being adapted for this movie. The other stories that surrounded it, one was an original story, but it was unpublished. It was a story that Frank Miller wrote. I think he drew, but he never published it. And another one was an entirely original story. That was another thing I was worried about. I was like going, wouldn't it have been better to maybe do a feature-length adaptation of Hell and Back, which is a king-size Sin City novel. It's huge and has a very strong psychological story and even has a pretty freaky hallucination sequence in it. No, they said, no, we're going strictly with A Dame to Kill For, which is fine because it does answer a lot of questions that the first film just kind of alluded to. Very little is actually known about why Sin City, A Dame to Kill For got delayed. Humorously, Frank Miller made a nod that Weinstein had something to do with it, and unfortunately, because of these delays, there were a lot of actors who couldn't be present for it. mainly owing to a slight case of death. Michael Clark Duncan, who played Matt Newt in the first one, had passed away. Well, this time he was replaced by Dennis Haysbert. Not a bad replacement. Mike Clark Duncan is a very distinctive presence, but the fact that Dennis Haysbert was able to slip into the role and enabled me to be able to have no problem, making the connection that it's the same character, that worked out really well. He still stepped into the role and was still the right level of imposing that the character really needed to be.
When you were 15, you killed 3 of the tunnels.
Another character who was not recast, which I was wondering about because her character did actually play something of a part in the actual graphic novel of Dame to Kill For, was Brittany Murphy, who played Shelley in the first one. She, of course, passed on as well, and, well, this time around they just wrote her character out. In terms of adaptation, they were able to cut her character out, and the story itself did not lose anything. The fact that they had to make these accommodations at all is indeed tragic. Overall, the replacement actors in A Dame to Kill For really served their purpose, and I never really found myself having to make comparisons because they did such a good job filling the respective shoes. So there's another one who replaced another actor, but we're gonna have to wait to talk about him later on. Unfortunately, the film did not do even close to the numbers that the first one did, and pretty much everyone can agree a lot of it had to do with the fact that it was so long between one movie and the other. And it's really a shame because Sin City: A Dame to Kill For is a really solid follow-up in its own right. I wouldn't say it's a superior follow-up to the first film, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that the stories that they used for the first one are some of the best in the history of the graphic novel series. The thing I gotta say, when I went to go see A Dame to Kill For, it felt, honestly, and I may lose some of you on this, but I actually really enjoyed the Hobbit trilogy. I knew it was never going to be as superior to The Lord of the Rings, but the reason why I enjoyed going to them, and why, even though, yeah, I agree it should never have been 3 movies, the reason why I enjoyed going back to them was that it kind of felt like going back to a place I loved being. Because I threw myself into Lord of the Rings, I loved it. And the Hobbit movies kind of just brought me back to those wonderful feelings I had when I watched the original. Well, Sin City: A Dame to Kill For, I go to bat for the exact same reason. Because as soon as the movie kicks off, as soon as it starts with the short story Just Another Saturday Night, with Mickey Rourke back again as Marv, and again, he's so good in the role that I never even began to think about the 9-year gap between the 2 movies. Mickey Rourke was back in it, still just as great as ever, and Just Another Saturday Night is a great short to kick things off with because it's, of course, one of Marv's funniest stories. It's actually kind of a darkly comedic story. It was just a really good one to get you back into the groove. It used something familiar to lure you back in, and, because because there had been so long, you needed something familiar to remind you why you love Sin City. And one of the major things people loved about the first Sin City was Mickey Rourke as Marv. Many people forget Sin City was the movie that brought back Mickey Rourke's career, because very soon after that he did The Rustler. And to see him come back to this role that he very clearly loved enough to dedicate himself to it, and the fact that you could see that he was still very much game for it, really kind of engaged me even more. It reminded me why I love Sin City. And because they used all these familiar elements to lure me back in, it enabled me to be able to just throw myself into this first story, which had never been published. Joseph Gordon-Levitt plays a character named Johnny, who is a justifiably cocky gambler who decides to, I guess for lack of a better word, give the ultimate fuck you to Senator Rourke. Now, this is one of the major pluses for the movie to me, is the fact that the first Sin City, for all of its great things, did leave a lot of plot threads hanging. The major one, of course, being Senator Rourke, who, at the end of the first one, was left enraged by the fact that Hartigan had killed his son and destroyed his legacy. And unfortunately, now he's pretty much angrier and he's still in power. And it's great to follow up on the story because even in the graphic novels, there was never any real resolution on what happened with Senator Rourke. So it was great that we got something new that continued the story onward. And even better, this story does actually segue into the other original story, Nancy's Last Dance, which does serve as something of a, I don't want to say a sequel to That Yellow Bastard, but it's kind of an epilogue. The first major thing I gotta say, and I never thought I'd ever say this about this actress, Jessica Alba is really freaking good in this movie. I've never really been on board with her as an actress for the most part. I thought she was awful as Sue Storm. But I gotta give her this, and I gotta give credit to Robert Rodriguez. Robert Rodriguez just seems to know Jessica Alba's abilities as an actress, and he somehow is able to bring out the best in her. Because I also thought she was really good in Machete. This time around, you could tell she really loved the script that she was given for Nancy's Last Dance, and she put herself into it. They did a great job illustrating her grief and her pain, and her drive to stick it to Senator Rourke. She was dancing at Katie's mainly because it was good money, so she could put herself through law school, so she can try to take down Senator Rourke legally. But in the wake of Hartigan's suicide, she had come to the realization that you just can't rely on due process, that the system is corrupt, that this city is just damaged, and that unfortunately, in order to, get the justice that she desires, unfortunately, you got to pretty much play by the rules of Sin City. You see Nancy go down this pretty horrific spiral to the point of self-mutilation, and even have to resort to deception of people that actually have her best interest at heart in order to get what she wants. And by the end of it, you get this vibe that even if she's putting on a good face later on, because a lot of times you see her in Sin City later on, you see her just fine, but you get this feeling that she is forever tainted by the things she had to do in the end of this movie. So the new material in this one really works. Joseph Gordon-Levitt's segment is memorable. It has a lot of great moments. Even has a great little side performance from Christopher Lloyd, which was great. And I can never get enough Christopher Lloyd. And Joseph Gordon-Levitt really does the smug gambler character especially well. It actually kind of makes me sad that these were never properly presented in graphic novel form, because I think they would have looked amazing. But I think that was also a pro for this movie, because one of the defining traits of the original movie was the fact that these were pretty much frame by frame, word for word, with the three stories and some of the side stories. And that was actually kind of cool, because Robert Rodriguez always endeavored to say, I didn't want to make Robert Rodriguez Sin City, I wanted to make Frank Miller Sin City. And that really showed in every frame of that movie. But much like how you felt that Guillermo del Toro had a lot more freedom to do more of his own thing with Hellboy 2, I actually kind of got the vibe that Frank Miller and Robert Rodriguez really embraced the fact that they were working with some new material, and that there was no pre-existing storyboards or there was no pre-existing material that they could copy off of, that they actually got a chance to do some much more cinematic techniques in order to convey these new stories. So for anyone saying that Sin City: A Dame to Kill For doesn't have anything of value in it, or that it's just more of the same, I refute that claim, because frankly, you've got a whole load of new material that even fans of the graphic novels have never seen before, and they're really good stories, and also do a really good job wrapping up a lot of things left over from the graphic novels and the first movie. So I can never ever say that A Dame to Kill For is a worthless film. So for all the new elements in this film, the big question, how does the one story that actually is from the graphic novels, how did this fare in being adapted to the screen? You know what? It's funny, because the new material is so good because it is new. It did kind of feel like we were wading in a familiar pool with A Dame to Kill For, because, again, I read this graphic novel and I was seeing this story perfectly adapted to the screen, so I was like, okay, good job, but I know where all this is going. So this is one of those cases where I envy people who've never read the books, but for my case, I was back in the mode that I was in the first movie, where I was like, okay, I just want to see how this graphic novel does in its adaptation, and it does the job. And some scenes, which I remember being incredibly bizarre and even a bit silly, worked really well, especially a scene involving Ray Liotta and Juno Temple. That was a scene that was kind of uncomfortable in the graphic novel, but I really loved Ray Liotta's performance and how insane he is in it, and really kind of gave a different life to that particular segment. The major thing of note in this one is the fact that Josh Brolin had to step in for Clive Owen, but from what I understand, it was always the intention of Robert Rodriguez, even back when Clive Owen was still on board, to cast a different actor to play Dwight prior to his surgery, because they do make allusions in The Big Fat Kill that he had his face changed. And it is exactly in the character of this world to do something as absurd as a complete facial overhaul to look and sound completely different, that if you had a different actor playing Dwight and then all of a sudden go through some surgery and then all of a sudden he looks like Clive Owen, that would have been totally in character for Sin City, and it would have been realistic, and it would never have destroyed the credibility. So it does make me sad that because Clive Owen was committed to the show The Nick, his schedule was too filled up that he couldn't come back to reprise Dwight post-surgery. And it really does. So what they had to do Josh Brolin in elaborate makeup to try to look like Clive Owen, and that's the one thing that I will say did not work. I was actually very disappointed that didn't work, because that would have been brilliant. It would have been great. But given the fact that that's my only real problem with this movie, that's not bad. That's not bad, but it is kind of unfortunate. It would have been something that I would have laughed at, but that's fine, because I kind of laughed at it when I read the graphic novel anyway. And that was the kind of thing I was looking forward to seeing in this movie, especially when they said they were going to have another actor play pre-surgery Dwight. I was like, that would have worked for me, but that's something they didn't do because they couldn't, and it's unfortunate. Another thing I gotta say really works in A Dame to Kill For is, and it's the one thing that needed to work in order to make the story on the whole sing, it had to be Eva Green as Ava Lord. Ava Lord in the original graphic novel is probably one of the most devious villains in the whole of the Sin City graphic novel series. I mean, she is just vicious. She is so powerful that she has people who are practically, hulking masses of strength just worshiping her. People are literally killing for her. They are, and even to the point where they're even killing themselves for her and doing all these horrific things all in her service, because she is so good at manipulation. And Eva Green, first off, is an amazing actress, and anyone who says otherwise, I defy you. I defy you. So the idea of her playing this powerful seductress, especially a film noir seductress, I just could never see how that could have gone wrong. And Green just plays the role so naturally. You never get the vibe that she had any kind of reluctance about anything she had to do. Eva Green did have to do a lot of nudity in this film. An argument can be made saying it's exploitative, but because of the nature of the character and because of what she uses at her disposal and what she's able to do with it, unfortunately, it's one of the defining traits of the character that it is kind of necessary. And the major props I got to give to both Frank Miller and Robert Rodriguez. I think they knew that it would have been very excessive, and if they didn't do it right, it would have just, been full-blown exploitation. They tried their best to show all this salacious imagery in probably the most graceful way possible, and also to kind of show the character the way all of the people who she enslaves see her. I mean, they had to seduce the audience as much as she seduces the main characters. And it's an awkward position to be in for both the actress and the filmmakers to be able to convey all this. Now, whether or not they succeed is, well, really it's all up to you, and it all comes down to how you feel about it. I mean, even I myself, upon rewatching, was going like, I can see people having problems with this. And I can't refute that. And even though through research I did know that Eva Green did feel slightly awkward about it, because she had such a great grasp on the character and the way she operates, it kind of helped her just kind of throw herself into it and just treat it as the most natural thing possible. And her performance, and it really comes through in her performance. So however you feel about it, I will not argue with it. But for myself, as a big fan of the graphic novel, I think she did an outstanding job, so I'm going to leave it at that. I don't get the vibe that it was ever endeavoring to try and outdo what they did in the first one. I think they just wanted to make a film that can go hand in hand with the original, and if that was their intention, I will say mission accomplished. It is a shame to me that this film did not do as well as the first one did, because there are a lot of other great Sin City stories that would have been just as enjoyable to adapt to film, and we're probably never going to see that. Still, nevertheless, we did get to see a lot of great stuff in this movie. We did get to see a great short story get adapted. We got one of the best Sin City stories put on film, and it does serve as a great companion to the first film by resolving a lot of stray plot lines that didn't get wrapped up or didn't get properly explained in the first film. So it does serve as a great companion to the first one, and much like the first one, it is a solid comfort flick. So, do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think that this was just such a mediocre retread of the first one? Or do you think that the delay severely hurt the film? Do you think that your love of the first one may have diminished by the time this new one came along? Let's discuss. Put that in the comments below. And in the meantime, like, share, subscribe, click, thou shalt be served, and see ya.